All right, Jabosai, good morning. Good morning. Let me begin first by thanking the sponsors of this morning's daf. And again, I apologize. Thank you for those who texted me or emailed me. I'm sorry if I inadvertently leave out anyone. The office is not open, so I don't know that I have all the updated sponsorship information, but at least I'll go with what I have. So to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, Dovi and Nina Elman, for dedicating all of the Shiurim and Drashos this month in honor of their daughter Ayelet becoming a Bas Mitzvah. May she continue to grow into an incredible Bas Yisrael and a source of nachas for her special mishpacha. We thank our Day of Learning sponsors, Adam and Leslie Rosen, in honor of their son Gideon, finishing Mishnayos Seder Mezikin, quite beautiful. Alan Wiseman for dedicating the shir. This is actually a Shabbos dedication. I'm sorry that I'm just getting to it now. Alan Wiseman for dedicating the shir in memory of his father Moshe ben Laban. And we dedicate our shir in the Chusura for Shlema for Ruchama Aviva Bas Sheina Chana. Again, I will say, if I left out any of the dedications, please feel free just to email me or to WhatsApp me, and in Meretz Hashem, I will do my best to get them all in. All right, so with that, let us begin. It's such a schus to be able to see everyone. It's schus to see everybody in the Beis Medrash at Shul. It's schus to be able to see everybody here on Zoom. Thank God my internet is back up, so now I can mamish see for the first time. I can see everybody on my computer screen as opposed to just seeing, one person on my phone screen. Mamish, great to see everyone. And also with that, let us begin. We have a really incredible and beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Lamed, and we are actually picking up from the top of Lamed. So also, so remember again in yesterday's daf, towards the end of the daf, we ended off with a discussion regarding fasting. It's much more of what's generally considered to be like a Yardea discussion, namely again about mixtures. Specifically, again, chametz is aser. So the shaila, and again, we've spent a significant amount of time speaking about the nature of the isser of chametz. Chametz before Pesach, chametz after Pesach, chametz during Pesach. And in yesterday's daf, the Gemara got into, well, what about mixtures of chametz? Well, so just one word of introduction of this. Remember, we've already seen, based on the fact that the Torah uses a lashon of kol machmetzes. So remember again, since it says kol machmetzes by definition teaches me that even mixtures of chametz are going to be aser as well. This is incredibly important, even mixtures of chametz. So the shayla, in the world of mixtures, we now have two different types of mixtures. There's what's called min b'mino, where you have two like items which become mixed, and min b'she'eno mino, two dissimilar items which become mixed. So in general, the halacha is so, and again, there are various intricacies, because some say min b'mino afilu b'mashu, right? If two like items get mixed together, so it can't really become an issue of taste. Why? Because since they are both the same, there's no real infusion of taste. The taste is the same. Min b'she'eno mino, two dissimilar items might be a little bit easier to gauge, because there you could see if the prohibited item infuses taste or not. So we saw a whole bunch of back and forth with this yesterday. Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, a couple of different Rab, Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, three different opinions on this discussion. So we come to the top of Lamed. Amar Rava says, Hilchasa, Rabbi say the halacha lamaisa is chametz bizmano, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, aser b'mashu karav. So we'll say, so Rava says, and this indeed is the halacha lamaisa, chametz bizmano, which means chametz on Pesach itself, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino. Whether chametz gets mixed in with like items or dissimilar items, aser b'mashu kirav. Chametz on Pesach, Rabosai, is aser b'mashu. Any minute amount of chametz, by definition, becomes aser on Pesach itself. This is incredibly important, Rabosai. So let's say, for example, just to illustrate this, so let's say during the year, you're preparing for Shabbos, and a drop of milk accidentally falls into your chicken soup. So everyone knows what's the halacha. Batal b'shishim, right? As long as there's 60 times more soup. So we'll say, when you have a little bit of chametz that falls into a mixture, even if there's 1,000 times more, we'll call it matzah than chametz, chametz is not batal on Pesach. Chametz is aser b'mashu. So therefore, again, now we'll say, there's an interesting discussion. Well, let me finish this first. Shelo b'zmano, however, again, not during Pesach itself, shelo b'zmano, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, muter k'Rebbi Shimon. So we'll say, interestingly enough, shelo b'zmano, which means halacha l'maisa, again, after Pesach, then ultimately, again, any mixtures of chametz are going to be mutter, like Rabbi Shimon. And I will say, and I remember again, Rabbi Shimon was the one who held that halacha l'maisa, chametz she'avar alav Pesach is a knas, right? Is a rabbinic penalty. It's not a biblical prohibition. And what Rabbi Shimon will hold is that knas only applies to what we call chametz be'en. Chametz be'en, only actual chametz. But mixtures of chametz are not subject to the halachos concerning, or the knas, I should say, of chametz she'avar alav Pesach. Therefore, I will say, Rava really telling us a very important piece of halacha. A mixture of chametz on Pesach, it's chametz aser b'mashu. Any minute amount of chametz automatically becomes aser. It doesn't make a difference what the chametz is mixed in with. Whether it's mixed in with mino, she'eno mino, makes absolutely no difference. Halacha l'maisa, again, chametz will be aser. Chametz she'avar alav Pesach, what about a mixture of chametz after Pesach? So that again, halacha l'maisa will be batal. Chametz will be batal on that mixture, because the only time that the knas of chametz she'avar alav ha-Pesach ultimately, again, is problematic is when it's what's called chametz be'en, actual chametz. But mixtures of chametz are not subject to the knas. And we'll say that indeed is halacha l'maisa. I'll just give you an extra kind of, it happens to be just an extra mara makom. There's fascinating discussions in the poskim about mixtures of chametz from before Pesach. We'll say again, let's say I have a mixture from before Pesach, and halacha l'maisa, the mixture was such that the chametz ingredient was batal. Does that bittul, or does that batal status carry into Pesach or not? Or perhaps once Pesach comes, chametz is what's called chazer veneer. Chametz once again is reawakened. Again, we'll see it in a little bit. Umi amar Rava. So we'll say, did Rava actually say this? V'amar Rava, but Rava said, Rabbi Shimon kinasa kanis. So we'll say, but one second, Rava said that halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Shimon imposed the rabbinic penalty. We'll say, remember again, Rabbi Shimon who holds that technically speaking, there is no lav, right? There is no prohibition on chametz after Pesach. So there's biblical prohibition. Rabbi Shimon holds that it's a rabbinic prohibition. So the Gemara says, you're right, this is only true when? This is only true ultimately, again, when the chametz is in existence by itself. But even Rabbi Shimon will agree that halacha l'maisa, what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows. You might have thought that once Rabbi Shimon is saying it's a knas, it's a penalty, so maybe the penalty applies to everything, right? Maybe the penalty of chametz she'avar alav ha-Pesach, chametz that was owned by a Jew over Pesach, maybe that chametz is subject to the penalty whether the chametz is be'en, in other words, extant by itself, or maybe it's even in a mixture. Kamash Malon, that according to Rabbi Shimon, the knas, the penalty of chametz she'avar alav ha-Pesach, halacha l'maisa, is only in a situation where the chametz itself is by itself. But the moment that it's in a mixture, halacha l'maisa, again, that penalty does not apply. But as the Rava l'tame, and Rava goes according to his previously established reasoning. And both look at Rashi for just a moment. Va'az the Rava, damar locha Rabbi Shimon. So both say Rava in general holds that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. Right? That's Rava's general approach. Namely, that again, chametz she'avar alav ha-Pesach, mid da'oraisa is mutter, but ultimately again is subject to a rabbinic penalty, a knas. So the Ta'ameh, look at Rashi, da'amar nami ba'alma chametz shal nachri shavar alav ha-Pesach mutter, af ba'achila. V'lekal of miknas be'midi v'i Rabbi Yehuda chametz stama kamafil nachri. Both remember again. Therefore, also according to Rabbi Shimon, this is very important. According to Rabbi Shimon, the knas of chametz she'avar alav ha-Pesach only applies to Jews, doesn't apply to non-Jews. So both say. So remember again. So the chametz owned by a non-Jew over Pesach is totally mutter to a Jew after Pesach. The knas of chametz she'avar alav ha-Pesach only applies to chametz owned by Jews. And I will say that very simple logic. Since if I'm a Jew and I owned chametz over Pesach, I have violated bal yimotze. Therefore, again, I'm slapped with a penalty after Pesach, and my chametz becomes usher for consumption, both me and for others. But again, a nachri, a guy obviously who was not in violation of bal yimotze, there's no problem, and therefore, again, his chametz is totally fine after Pesach. So we'll also listen to this. The Gemara Baz Rav Latame, the Amar Rav Rava, Ki Havinu and Bei Rav Nachman. Listen to this. As Rav said, when I was by Rav Nachman, listen to this. Ki Havonafki Shiv Yom de Pesach, when Pesach was over. So we'll say, again, in time immemorial, Jews always do the same thing on Motzei Pesach. Always do the same thing. And no, it's not get pizza. I want to be very clear on that. I have to tell you something. That's a minhag Yisrael that I Pashut never understood. For 7 days, we've been pressing achila gasa, and mamish, somehow again there's an insatiable desire for pizza on Matzah Yom Tov, meaning no clothing fits. They have to carve out a few inches on the doorway, but somehow Klal Yisrael needs pizza. Not that minhag, but a basic other minhag. Go to the supermarket. You have to get chametz. Right? At the end of the day, I have to go ahead and get. So listen to this. So Rava says, when I was in the house of Rav Nachman, when Pesach was over, Amrlan, he would say to us, Rav Nachman would say to us, Poku v'zabinu chamir d'bnei chela. Go out and buy chametz from the soldiers. Now look at Rashi. Bnei chela nochrim afal pi she'ofihu yom zeh she'avar v'hu Pesach. So both say this is very interesting. So Rav is when I was by Rav Nachman tells us when Yom Tov was over, go out and soldiers. I guess there were soldiers stationed in the area. The soldiers had chametz. They had baked bread during the day. So Rav Nachman said to us, go out and buy some bread from the soldiers. So we'll say, so it's actually very interesting because again, what the Gemara is suggesting is you see from here that halacha l'maisa, even though when was this bread baked? This bread was baked again by the soldiers on Pesach itself. But you see again, there's no issue of chametz she'avar alav haPesach with chametz owned by Gentiles. So I'll say, therefore again, now what I want to point out, I'll say two interesting things over here. Number one, of course, this only works because the Gentiles did not bake it for the Jews, right? Remember again, if you have a situation of a Gentile who baked chametz for a Jew, so that's a different issue, not of chametz per se, but ultimately again of malacha. Remember again, I'm not really supposed to benefit from a malacha that a nachri does for me on Shabbos Yom Tov. This is why, in a very simple example, you want to go to Dunkin' Donuts on Motzei Shabbos to get a donut. You have to wait Birtei Shia, so you have to wait a certain amount of time after Shabbos before going, in order not to benefit from malacha potentially done on your behalf after Shabbos as well. So we'll say, what's also interesting about this, although it's not a topic for now, is that they were eating bread baked by non-Jews, which is actually quite fascinating in and of itself. Again, this is a whole discussion in Maseches Avodah Zarah about pas akum, pas palter. It wasn't uncommon until not so long ago of Jews buying, bread from Goyim under certain circumstances. Again, so I'm just pointing out an interesting idea, not on a topic, but I'm just pointing out over here that halacha l'maisa. So we'll say, so therefore Rava tells us three very important halachas. Number one, that we've already established, like Rabbi Shimon, namely that chametz she'avar alav Pesach is only asr al knas. It's a rabbinic penalty. Number two, it only applies to chametz owned by Jews, not by non-Jews. Number three, any mixture of chametz on Pesach itself, or I should say, any mixture which contains chametz on Pesach itself is going to be asr afilu b'mashehu. Even any minute amount of chametz will asr the mixture. Halacha number 4, the prohibition or the knas of chametz she'avar alav Pesach only applies to what we call chametz be'en. Chametz be'en, which means chametz which exists on its own. But any chametz that is part of a mixture is not subject to the halachos of chametz she'avar alav haPesach. Beautiful. Weiter. Amarav. Rav says as follows, Kederos bePesach yishabru. So let's listen to this interesting case. So Rav says, if you have earthenware vessels, so we'll say now we're going to get into the topic of blios. If you have a utensil, ultimately again, that absorbed chametz. So now I have an earthenware vessel that absorbed chametz before Pesach. So what do I do with it on Pesach? Rav says you have to break it. You have to break it. Look at Rashi. We'll say very quickly. Amar Rav Kider so Pesach Yishabru. Rav L'tamei da Amar Chametz Afla Achar Zmano Aser Bano. Rav Yehuda ve'Islei b'Mashu v'Kasaver Nosein Tam Nifgam Aser. So we'll say. So we'll explain this in just a moment. But ultimately, again, Rav is saying halacha l'maaseh. If you have blios, you have chametz absorptions in an earthenware utensil, you must go ahead and destroy the utensil. Va'amai, I don't understand, why do I have to go ahead and destroy it? L'shinul achar ha-pesach, let me just, obviously I can't use it on Pesach itself, I got that, but let me just hold on to it till after Pesach, and ultimately again, I'll make sure to always use that utensil shelo b'minon. Because you're supposed to remember again, if I'm concerned that maybe if there's a chametz absorption in there, and that chametz absorption ultimately again was there through Pesach, therefore maybe according to Rav that absorption becomes asur as well. And then if I go ahead and I cook like chametz or like item in there, it becomes min b'mino. Min b'mino is not batel. I'll use it shelo b'minon. Ultimately, again, there is a gzeira that you may come to use it b'mino. Okay. Shmuel Amar, we'll say Shmuel, and now we'll say I'm focusing more on the sheet of Shmuel because this is the halacha l'maisa. Shmuel says, Lo yishabru, you do not have to break the earthenware utensils. No need for that. Ava mashi luhu la'achar zmano, va'avid v'hu bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino. We'll say Shmuel holds that halacha l'maisa, there is no need to break anything. No need to break anything. But ultimately, again, you just go ahead and maintain it till after Pesach. And then after Pesach, you could use the pot, you could use the earthenware vessel for whatever you want. So we'll say, Shmuel ultimately, again, goes according to his reason. I just want to point out, according to Shmuel, what Shmuel is saying is like this. Halacha l'maisa, the Isser of Chametz is on Chametz be'en, actual Chametz. What does the Isra of Chametz not apply to? It doesn't apply to absorptions. So therefore, again, what I want to point out, what does this mean on a practical level? On a practical level is I can't use a Chametz pot, right? Because if I use the Chametz pot, ultimately, again, then I potentially release those absorptions into the food. But what I don't have to do is get rid of my chametz utensils. In other words, I don't have to go ahead and destroy my utensils because of the absorptions. In other words, we'll say there's not a problem of ownership of absorptions. So, for example, I could own my chametz utensils. That's not a problem. I just can't own actual chametz. So therefore, again, Rav seems to indicate that halacha l'maisa there's a problem ultimately again with owning the absorptions. Shmuel holds that halacha l'maisa no, you can't use the pots. And again, remember this is talking about earthenware utensils here, and earthenware utensils halacha l'maisa again really they absorb but they don't emit. So the problem you have with earthenware utensils are trapped absorptions. So Shmuel says you can't use them on Pesach, but you also don't have to destroy them. Just leave them alone, and after Pesach you'll resume using it. Shmuel goes according to his reasoning. What does Shmuel say? Damar Shmuel lahano demizabni kandi ashvu zadini achan dichi. So we'll listen to this. So we'll say, so apparently what used to happen is as follows. After Pesach, it was very common for the pot salesman. That doesn't sound right. Right, for the utensil salespeople to go ahead. This was good. We'll keep it. So we'll say, so again, this was for the cookingware salespeople, to go ahead and sell new cookingware after Pesach. So we'll say, so what would happen? Because some people used to think that, halacha l'maisa after Pesach, you need new pots. And I will say in general, there's a lot of confusion around Pesach. You see this every year with sometimes like the crazy extent that people go to with cleaning it properly. Of course, you have to clean, but anytime something in your Yiddishkeit is making you crazy, chances are you're doing it wrong. The ways of the Torah are beautiful. The ways of Yiddishkeit are beautiful. If something is giving you anxiety or making you crazy, then you're just not doing it correctly. So we'll say, so apparently people used to buy new pots. They used to buy new pots and pans after Pesach. So we'll say, so what happened? So there was a shtigl price gouging sometimes, right? The demand was intense. So Shmuel told the utensil salespeople, he said, listen, if you price gouge, He said, I will make a public announcement that people don't have to buy new utensils. And if I make a public announcement that people don't have to buy new utensils, you're going to be out of business. So I'm happy to let you sell your stuff. But at the end of the day, keep your prices reasonable. V'ilo, because if you price gouge, darshina l'chu Rabbi Shimon, I will go ahead and tell everybody that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. Rashi says, "Demutaros hakederos hayishanos lachar Pesach." Because remember again, the only potential reason you would say that pots after Pesach would be problematic would be because would be a result of chametz sha'avar alav Pesach. But remember again, we paskin like Rabbi Shimon, and according to Rabbi Shimon, chametz sha'avar alav Pesach is a knas, is a penalty, and the only time the penalty applies is to actual chametz itself. Remember, again, just plain chametz, meaning not a mixture of chametz, and certainly not two absorptions of chametz. So you have over here Shmuel telling the utensil salespeople, guys, don't price gouge, or I'm going to darshan that people don't really need to buy new utensils at all. So we'll say, so the Gemara says, I velidrosh lahu the hashmul Rabbi Shimon severely. So I don't understand, Shmuel, why don't you give that shear? I don't understand. Why not go ahead and give that shear? Why not tell the people, arm the people with the logic, with the knowledge that halacha l'maaseh, again, the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon? It was very interesting. The Gemara says, Asrei derav hava, because Shmuel wasn't in his own city. Shmuel was in the city of Rav. And Rabbi, remember again, Rav is on record as saying that halacha l'maaseh, if you have earthenware utensils with chametz absorptions, you really do have to break them. So because Shmuel was not in his own city, he would not paskin halacha, which Rabbi say is such an incredible and beautiful display of humility. We saw this again in the beginning of Masechah Shabbos as well, not beginning of Masechah Shabbos, in Masechah, or in Eruvin, we spoke about, again, how deferential a Talmud has to be to a Rebbe. In this case, again, Rav and Shmuel are not Talmud and Rebbe, they're peers. They're peers. But Lamaise, again, Shmuel thought it inappropriate, ultimately, again, to paskin halacha and Rav City, which Rabbi says in general also about the need to be respectful to practices and norms, even if they're not our own. Sometimes, again, we find ourselves in circumstances and we might have a different set of practices or values or whatever approaches, and we find ourselves in a different situation. So often we like to go ahead and bring our hashkafas and our values and our practices with us and seek to impose them in every situation. A person has to know your hashkafas, your values, your practices are incredible, but sometimes you have to respect the minhag makom as well, even if it's different than what you would do. So Shmuel ultimately again says, listen, I'm not going to get up and give a shir since the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon because I'm in the city of Rav. Good. But let's say weiter. These fascinating cases. Hutanura, the tachu beitichei. So let's listen to this case. There was a situation, ultimately again, of an oven. I will say, now, just so you understand, in general, we assume that whenever the Gemara talks about an oven, it's an earthenware oven. That's the assumption we're making. Now again, we'll challenge that in a bit, but Lamaisa, that's the assumption for now. Sahu tanura de tachu beitichei. So there was a particular oven that was smeared with grease. So we'll say, look at Rashi. He says, tachu beitichei, it's the first wide line. Shuma nostin lo bekarki, so venosin tam balechem. So we'll say, so what they would do is they would put some like schmaltz, they would put some grease on the bottom of the oven, and they would put the bread would bake on that. So it would accomplish two things. Number one, it would infuse some taste into the loaf of bread, but it also had like a shtickle frying effect. Right? So you baked, but because the schmaltz, because the fat was there, it also had a frying effect. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Asra Rava bar Ayilai lemecha rifta afilu b'milcha li'olam. So we'll say Rava bar Ayilai, he said, the bread is asr. The bread is asr, and you can't even eat it ultimately again with salt. So we'll say, which means this loaf of bread is prohibited for consumption. Now, and I want to point out over here, this is not a case of chaylev, right? Chaylev is forbidden fat. This is a case of shuman, right? Shuman is permitted fat. So I just want to be clear on the situation. So here, I'm smearing the bottom of my oven with permitted fat, right? Whether I'm actually putting the bread on it or I'm going ahead and baking the bread in it, the assumption is that the bread itself has an absorption of shuman, an absorption of the schmaltz, of the fat, the permitted fat. So therefore, Rava said, it is usher to go and eat this bread. So we'll say, so why? Because you may come to eat this bread with kusach. Remember again, kusach is that Babylonian dip, delicious, made of curdled milk, moldy bread, right? It's milchix. Right? So therefore, we'll say this happens to be a fascinating sugya, that halacha l'maisa, you can't make anything other than par of bread. This halachun shulchan aruch. Gemara Masechet Avodah Zarah. You are not permitted to make fleshik bread or milchik bread, dairy bread or meat bread. Why? Because since bread is a meal staple, right? That is eaten with all kinds of meals. The concern is that if you make a loaf that's milchiks or fleshiks, you just may come to inadvertently eat it with the other kind of food item and inadvertently transgress. So therefore, the halacha is bread is always par. Now, the truth is, we'll see there are some exceptions to that rule as well. But halacha l'maisa, so again, Abba says that in this case over here, someone smeared the oven with schmaltz. They put a little bit of fat on it, or a lot of fat on it, baked the bread inside of that oven. Rava bar Ahiloi said that halacha l'maisa, you can't eat the bread even by itself. Even by itself. Meisvei, so the Gemara says, really, is that true? Ein lo shnesa isa b'cholov. Right? We'll say you can't go ahead and knead a bread with milk. V'im losh kolapas kula asura mipnei hergal avera. And if you did so, the entire loaf is asur because of hergal avera. And we'll say hergal avera, same idea. You can't go ahead and start making milchik bread, because milchik bread, ultimately, again, it's a recipe for disaster, right? The person's just going to inadvertently end up going ahead and eating it with a fleshik meal. Kiyotze bo, similarly, Ahmed Bezer will say, Kiyotze bo, ein tashin es hatanur ba'alya. You also can't go ahead and coat an oven with alya, with fat. V'im tash, alya is the specifically the fat of the tail. V'im tash kalapas kula asura. And if you did so, all of the bread baked inside of the oven is going to be asur. Ad sheyasik es hatanur. Until you go ahead and you burn out the oven, which we'll say essentially is another way of saying you have to kasher the oven. So in other words, in this case over here, again, I smeared the oven with the schmaltz. So again, the Gemara is telling me over here that halacha l'maisa, any bread baked with that schmaltz is going to be asur. But if you burn out the oven, then you kasher the oven, then you could once again go ahead and cook part of bread in there, and you're good to go. Ha hosak hatanor mihashari. Now we'll say, now here's what's interesting, just to kind of frame the kasha in the right way. See, we'll say when Rava, the Gemara seems to understand over here that in Rava bar Ahiloi's case, what he was saying was, once the oven was smeared with schmaltz, you can't cook bread, you can't bake bread in there ever. You can't bake bread in there ever. That's what it sounds like. Because any bread baked in there ever is going to be fleshiks. Yet now the Gemara brings another brayso, and the brayso says, same thing. You can't go ahead and coat the oven with the fat of the tail, but halacha l'maisa, if you did so, it's not a problem. You can always go ahead and burn it out. You could burn it out. You could kasher it. So the Gemara says, ha husakatanar miyashari. Tiyufta de Rava bar Ahiloi tiyufta. So ultimately, and Abba say this refutes the position of Rava bar Ahiloi, and indeed refutes it. Therefore, Abba say halacha l'maisa, everyone will agree that if you coated the oven with schmaltz and you went ahead and you cooked the bread in that oven, that the bread is going to be fleshik and prohibited for consumption. But halacha l'maisa, if the oven is kashered, then halacha l'maisa, ultimately again you can go ahead and bake parve bread in there as well. So the Gemara says as follows: Amrli Ravina the Ravashi. So Ravina said to Ravashi, "V'chi me'achar di'isosiv Rava bar Eloi amai ka'amarav kederos bePesach yishabru." But we'll say, but one second, after now we've effectively refuted the position of Rava bar Ahiloi, then ultimately again, why does Rav still hold that utensils which have chametz absorptions need to be broken? So we'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. Me'achar di'isosiv Rava bar Ahiloi v'shaminan dehesik moa l'klicheres kederos bePesach amai yishabru yisikim v'yistamnu. So we'll say, so remember again, like I said before, the assumption we make is that whenever we talk about a tanur ultimately, again, is made of earthenware. What did we just learn about? So what did we just see? Apparently, you could kasher an earthenware oven. V'haraya, if you go ahead and you coat it with schmaltz and you bake a loaf of bread in there, the loaf of bread is going to be asur. But if you go ahead and you burn out the oven, then halacha l'maisa, you could go ahead and subsequently bake bread in there. Okay, so which tells me that I could go ahead and effectively kasher an earthenware utensil. well, if you can kasher an earthenware utensil, then halacha lamaisa, why does Rav say that earthenware utensils with chametz absorptions have to be broken? Why don't you just kasher it? To which the Gemara says, Amrle hasam tanur shal mateches hacha bikder shal cheres. Oh, to which the Gemara says, no. In fact, the tanur that we're talking about, Rabbosai, is in fact not a tanur made of earthenware, but rather, in fact, it is a tanur made of metal. Talking about a metal utensil, not an earthenware utensil. Whereas opposed to when Rav said you have to break the utensils that have chametz absorptions, he was talking about a utensil made of earthenware. So we'll say, so this totally changes the conversation. So now, again, back to kind of what we already knew, always knew to be true, which was that halacha l'maisa, metal can be kasher through purging, but ultimately, again, earthenware cannot, and therefore Rav would hold that halacha l'maisa, the earthenware utensils, which have chametz absorptions, must be destroyed. But a tanor, which was smeared with oil, with schmaltz, can be kasher through simply burning it out because you're dealing with a metal oven. The Gemara Zavi by saying the other possibility is hava habishal cheres. It could very well be that halacha l'maisa, both the oven in question as well as the utensils in question are both made of earthenware. But one second, if that's the case, then I should say, just like the oven could be kashered and remove any semblance of the schmaltz from it, so too the utensils should be kasherable and remove the chametz from it. To which the Gemara supposed to say is fascinating. Zeh hesikan mi bifnim, v'zeh hesikan mi b'chutz. Oh, listen to this. Here's the difference between an oven and a utensil. An oven is kashered from the inside out, versus a utensil which would be kashered from the outside in. So what I say, interestingly enough, the Gemara makes a fascinating distinction over here. That halacha l'maisa, again, it could very well be that when do we say, under normal circumstance, let me see differently, when do we say that an earthenware utensil can be kashered? That's only able to say with a superior form of kashering, which means kashering from the inside out, where the fire is placed on the interior of the utensil, such as an oven. But let's say again, with an earthenware utensil, where normally that's not the way that it's kashered, halacha l'maisa, again, the earthenware utensil will not be kasherable, and that's why Rav holds, although again, we saw Shmuel disagrees, when we pass on like Shmuel, but Rav holds that halacha l'maisa, you have to go ahead and break any earthenware utensils with chametz absorptions. But one second, v'chitema, hachinami the avid hasakami bifnim. I will say, okay, so fine. So just why not say kasher earthenware utensils with fire from within? I was supposed to take your blowtorch, put it inside the earthenware utensil, and kasher it like that. So we'll say this is incredible. Chayis, the Gemara says, chayis alam mishum depaka. So we'll say because we're concerned that a person is not really going to kasher it well, because he's concerned that halacha l'maisa, the earthenware utensil is going to break. So we'll say there's a lot of interesting halachas here that are referencing hilchos hechsher kelim, the halachos of kashering utensils. So for example, one of the concepts we have by hechsher kelim is that if you have a utensil that is delicate, that you're concerned is going to break, under certain circumstances, that utensil is not really kasherable. Because what's the concern? The concern is you're not really going to do a thorough job in kashering it because you're too scared regarding the fragility of the utensil. So listen to what's happening over here. So the Gemara is suggesting as follows. We always thought up until now that an earthenware utensil cannot be kashered, but yet we see that an earthenware oven can be kashered, to which the Gemara says, you're right, that's because you're burning it from the inside out. But when Rav said that earthenware utensils which have chametz absorptions need to be broken, that's because those you would kasher from the outside, and that kashering process is not thorough enough, and therefore halacha l'maisa, that's why it is going to, you'd have to break it. The Gemara says, so why not just kasher the earthenware utensils from the inside out? No, because we're concerned you're not really going to do a thorough enough job in kashering it, because you're going to be too concerned that the earthenware utensils are going to break. And in any situation when we are concerned that you would be preoccupied with the fragility of the utensil, we're concerned that will compromise the quality and integrity of your kashering process. Hilchach, therefore the Gemara says, Hai buchya, this buchya. Now this is actually very interesting. Rashi says, buchya is kli shehu merafim shekorin tailish Va'ofin umetagnin bo kikar. So we'll say, so Rashi calls this a tile. Tilish is a tile. If you have the Hagos Shunim in your Gemara, you can see the letter Beis. Luchos cheres hamishamshimin lechipoy hagagos. So we'll say, so literally, Rashi says it's referring ultimately again to a roof tile. So we'll say, so what they had is they had roof tiles that were earthenware. They were earthenware roof tiles. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, so like in Eretz Yisrael. So I'll say, so interestingly enough, so what would happen? Technically speaking, you could bake bread on those tiles. They were saying you had an extra tile lying or use it. Now it's interesting. We'll see later on that this buchya was actually circular in nature. So what you would do is you would actually go or semicircular, have some type of circular form. So listen to this. Hilcha chai buchya hesika mi bachutzu. So I'll say, so normally if you were to bake bread in the buchya, ultimately, again, what would you do? You would put the dough inside the tile or on the tile, and then you would put the fire underneath the tile. That's normally how you would do it. However, the Gemara says, Hesiko mi bachutz va'aser. So we'll say, under normal circumstances, I would say, therefore, a buchya cannot be kashered. Because a buchya, like for Pesach, because a buchya, like any other earthenware utensil, ultimately is what? Is heated from the outside, not from the inside, and therefore halacha l'maisa can't be kashered for Pesach. However, v'imal yogumri shapir dami. But interestingly enough, if you were to go ahead and fill it with coals, halacha l'maisa it would work. So I say apparently, if you have a utensil, an earthenware utensil, which you could fill with fire on the interior, and there would be no concern, ultimately, again, with breakage, then halacha l'maaseh that would be permitted for kashering for Pesach as well. All right, so therefore we'll say a lot of very interesting halachas come out of this. So in general, we'll say you should know we don't kasher earthenware for Pesach. We don't kasher earthenware in general. There are certain exceptions to this rule with earthenware that hasn't been used for a prolonged amount of time. Like if you have an earthenware utensil that has sat dormant for a long time, there may be kulas associated with that. But in general, we don't kasher earthenware because we assume that when it comes to earthenware absorbs, but it does not emit. But so we also see from here that halacha l'maisa, again, the whole sugya with milchiks and fleishiks. But I'll just say something very interesting, just an exception to this rule. So general, the halacha is you can't make bread that is milchiks or fleishiks. Bread can only be parav. The only exception to this rule, I'll say, is if you make bread in a specific shape. So, for example, let's say again you make bread, in the form of a cow. That doesn't sound very appealing, but at Lamaisa, you make bread in the shape of a cow. So that's my fleishik loaf. So if there's a siman on the loaf, that halacha l'maisa again indicates that it's milchiks or fleishiks, Shulchan Aruch says that could be permitted. Another possibility also is if everyone knows that a particular type of bread is milchiks or fleishiks, that could also, for example, potato bread. I don't know why this is, but for example, potato bread is often milchiks, is often dairy. So certain types of bread, which by definition are always, but again, general the halacha is we make bread parav. And this is incredibly important, I will say, because again, sometimes a person is baking challah, you're baking challah on Erev Shabbos, and again, you're also baking other things in your oven. Well, if you go ahead and you bake challah in your oven when you're baking your chicken, so your challah is fleishiks. And that is, one should not do that, right? You could cover the chicken or cover the challah. I don't know if you can cover challah when you bake it, but lamaisa, you have to make sure that the challah, that bread, does not become milchiks or fleishiks. Good. Weiter says the Gemara. Amalei Rabbeinu Rav Ashi Hani Sakini b'Pesach. So we're going to spend now a little bit of time talking about kashering on Pesach, which is really quite interesting. Hani Sakini b'Pesach Hechi Avdina Lo. So we'll say, how do you kasher knives for Pesach? How do you kasher knives for Pesach? So says the Gemara, Amar Le'Lididi Charata Ka'avidna. So listen to this. Ravina says to Rav Ashi, Rabbi, how do I kasher knives for Pesach? Rav Ashi says, by us we don't kasher knives, we just get new knives. So listen to this. Amar Le Teinach Mar de Efshalei, the Lo Efshalei Mai. Okay, Rabbi, that's very nice. Rav Ashi, you can get new knives. What about for the rest of us that can't get new knives? How do we kasher our existing knives for Pesach? Says the Gemara, Amrale, Ana ke'ein charatakami. No, Rav Ashi says, no, you don't say. I didn't literally mean that we actually buy new knives, but rather what I meant was we make our knives like new knives. How do you make your knives like new knives? So listen to this. This is fascinating. So the Gemara says, Ana kein chadata kamina. Katayo betina. So first thing we do is we wrap the handle in clay. Now we're going to see the reason they were doing that was to protect the handle while they were koshering the blade. Then we go ahead and we put the blade in fire. So therefore, both say they're koshering the blade of the knife through libun, through fire. And then we uncover the handle from the clay. So both say the clay was there to protect the handle from fire. And then we go ahead and we put the handle ultimately in boiling water, because the handle itself could be koshered in boiling water. What's the halacha? Both say both the blade as well as the handle ultimately again could go ahead and be submersed in hot water. Ubikli rishon. But Rabbi has to be the type of boiling water that's a kli rishon. So kli rishon ultimately means a pot of fire, a pot of water that is on the fire. See, Baruch Fischel is on. Baruch Fischel could attest to this. He's done this many, many years for us in the shul. So we'll say, so that's how we kasher. So we'll say that what I want to point out over here is something very interesting, which is a halacha in the halachas of kashering. See, I both say, the general rule is as follows. In general, when it comes to kashering, there's one rule that governs kashering, which is kibolo kach polto. However the item comes in, the absorption comes in, is how the absorption comes out. That's the general rule. And that's why Rav Ashi was saying that halacha l'maisa, again, a knife which generally could be used with, let's say, items on the fire or contact with hot items directly, is generally going to be kashered through fire itself. What the Gemara now is suggesting will say is as follows. Chametz, kashering for Pesach is an interesting thing, because an absorption of chametz before Pesach is a totally permitted absorption. It's only on Pesach itself that the absorption becomes problematic. So when I come to kasher my utensils before Pesach, I have to kasher my utensils from an absorption that, technically speaking, in this moment, is a permitted absorption. So because it is a permitted absorption, the halachos of kashering are a bit more relaxed. It's what's called hetera bala. The object or the absorption that is in my knife is actually, technically speaking, permitted. So because of that, generally hagala, putting an item in boiling water, will work for most things. Will really work for most things. And that's what it means already. The Gemara says, Idi v'idi beroschen lebekli rishon. Amar Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua, eitz parer. What about a wooden serving spoon, or Rashi says magisin sakadeh, really a wooden mixing spoon. Wooden mixing spoon. So what's the halacha? Magila beroschen lebekli rishon. Ultimately, again, all you do is you go magila beroschen. You go ahead and you immerse it in hot water, or actually do hagala in boiling water, ubekli rishon, which means a primary utensil on top of the fire. Kasara kibolo kachpolto. And I will say there it's a little bit more direct. Kibolo kachpolto, the way it goes in is the way it comes out. How is a wooden mixing spoon used? So a wooden mixing spoon is used in a pot on the fire. Right, I use it to mix. So I'm mixing my chametz soup or my chametz stew. So now the wooden mixing spoon is chametz. How do I kasher it? Again, same way, by immersing it in a pot of boiling water on top of the fire. Boy mine mea memro said this is a great case. So that's why I remember the following case. Hani mani de kunya. Suppose to listen to this. We now come to the sugya of clay kunya. So this actually, the primary sugya of clay kunya, I will say, is in Avodah Zarah. Look here, Rashi's moon kunya, pulimir, belaz, b'shal cherasu b'tavach ba'ever. So we'll listen to this. If you look, by the way, he has it. So we'll say, so this essentially, clay kunya are coated utensils. In this case, what we're dealing with is as follows. I have an earthenware utensil that has a lead coating. Now, both say, now this is actually very dramatic, because earthenware, remember, as we just established before, absorbs and doesn't emit. Lead is metal. Metal absorbs and it emits. So we'll say, so what happens when you have a clay kunya? What happens when you have an earthenware utensil that is coated with lead? What is the status of that utensil, specifically vis-a-vis kashering? It's an incredible kasha. To which the Gemara says, listen to this. So the Gemara says, so we'll say if it's one of the green utensils, if it's one of the green utensils. In other words, if this is the clay kunya, that the earthenware part has a greenish hue, so it's very interesting. Rashi says, so apparently the alum content is very high of that type of earthenware, and halacha lamaisa, again, Rashi says over here, it absorbs, it has a strong absorption quality, and therefore it does not emit. So if it's one of the greenish utensils, then halacha lamaisa can't be kasher for Pesach. Kiti b'aylecha, where does your kasha come up? So the Gemara says, Uchmi b'chiyuri, if it's a black one or a white one. Mai, v'heicha despu kartufi loti b'aylecha, devade asiri. Furthermore, I will say if it has cracks in it, cracks in any utensil will generally render it unable to be kasher. I will say that is halacha lamaisa in the laws of kasher. Whenever you have cracks tell you cannot kasher this particular utensil. So the Gemara says, so what I'm asking is, what happens if the utensil is smooth? So we'll say, so what happens if I have a clay kunya, which is an earthenware utensil coated with lead, of the black variety or the white variety that is smooth? Can such a utensil be kashered for Pesach or not? We'll say, what's really driving this discussion? What is the status of a coated utensil? Does the status of a coated utensil determined by the underlying kli? In this case, it's an earthenware utensil. Or do we look at the coating as giving the identity to the utensil? Samarle, the Gemara says, Amarle chazina lahu dimidaisi. We see that when you go ahead and you use a utensil like this type of clay kunya, this earthenware utensil coated with lead, we see that ultimately, again, the utensil sweats. It sweats. Look at Rashi. Dimidaisi poltin hamashkin midofnon hachitzon. V'cheiva dimidaisi vadai bali v'holu bali shuv einan poltin. So we'll say the fact that it sweats indicates thus that halacha l'maaseh clearly absorbs. Alma bali va'asiri. Ultimately, again, therefore it absorbs and therefore it is aser. And we'll say once you demonstrate that it absorbs, and we're talking about an earthenware utensil. Once an earthenware utensil absorbs, it never emits that which it absorbed. To which the Gemara says, but why is this different than a case of yayin nesach? What happened by yayin nesach? The Darish Mereimar, because Mereimar said, Mani de kunya ben ochma ben chiyuri ben yeruki shari. But so listen to this. Mereimar said that when it comes to these clay kunya, right, whether again you're talking about black clay kunya, white clay kunya, green clay kunya, shari, ultimately again it is permitted for use. In other words, we'll say even if you put yayin nesach inside of one of these utensils, yayin nesach, remember again, is idolatrous wine, the utensil itself is still permitted. And maybe you'll say, here's the difference. Yes, I could use clay kunya even after it had yayin nesach in it, because we both say yayin nesach at the end of the day is only d'Rabbanan. Right now, when we say yayin nesach d'Rabbanan, it means wine that belongs to a Gentile is asr d'Rabbanan. Obviously, wine that was actually used for avodah zarah, ultimately, again, is asr midaraisa. They're using yayin nesach over here as wine owned by a Gentile. And therefore, the Gemara says that's not a good reason. Called the tikkun Rabbanan came d'Oraisa tikkun. But whenever the rabbis enact their halachas, they always enact their d'Rabbanan like a d'Oraisa. Amrlei, very simple. Zeh tashmisho ayidei chamin, v'zeh tashmisho ayidei tzonan. Ultimately, again, the Gemara says, here's the difference. The difference is, when you're using the clay kunya for wine, you're using it for cold. So we'll say, because you're using it for something cold, there's not an absorption. But halacha l'maaseh, by the chametz, you're using it for something warm. And when you're using it for something warm, that's when there's an absorption. Amar Rava bar Abba, Amar L'chi bar Ashi, Amar Shmuel, kol hakelim shenishtamshu ban chametz betzonin, mishtamshu matzah, chutz min beis or hol v'shechimutzo kasha. So we'll say, another very interesting halacha. So therefore, we'll say, what comes out over here is as follows. That halacha l'maisa, with these clay kunya, we'll say just in general, I would just tell you, let me finish before I go down to this next piece. With clay kunya in general, there's an incredible amount of discussion about it, about the status of these clay kunya. When you have a utensil that has an outer coating that's one type of min, and an inner utensil that's something else, what is the status of utensil? I will say, so here we're talking about earthenware utensils that are ultimately coated with, let's say, a lead glaze. So what you begin to see from the halacha over here is, at least legabe chametz, we're still going to treat that ultimately again as an earthenware utensil, and therefore cannot be kashered for Pesach use. Interestingly enough, if you used it for something cold, then halacha l'maisa we assume no absorption occurred. But I will tell you, with this I'll conclude, but I'll tell you where this comes up. Interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa is Rabbi say, what is the status of glazed china? Glazed china. So china is earthenware. China is earthenware. Earthenware ultimately, again, does not require tevilah, does not require immersion in the mikvah. Yet, very often, china has a glaze. That glaze is glass. Glass does require tevilah. So I will say, what is the status of glazed china? Is it earthenware, which doesn't require tevilah? Is it ultimately, again, glass, which does require tevilah? Major machlokes haposkim. I will say, again, based on this entire discussion. We'll have to stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem with Amar Rava in Meretz Hashem tomorrow. Both saying incredible yashikayach to everyone. Have a wonderful day. Shikayach, everyone.